Hi, good morning, or actually, I should say good afternoon. My day, I got to do some work this morning, and I'm coming to you guys after Thanksgiving weekend. I think a lot of you guys are probably back from hopefully what was a wonderful weekend with family, maybe some friends. Whatever you did for Thanksgiving, I hope it put you in some good spirits and it leads you into an amazing holiday Christmas season ahead. So, it's interesting because the holidays can bring up a lot of feelings for people. Sometimes they're really wonderful. We start to decorate, it's great. And then for some people, the holidays kind of bring up different feelings, whether you have been going through some stuff, maybe you had a loss this year of a loved one. Holidays sometimes can be really hard for people, and that kind of does bring a lot of things to the surface. So today I kind of want to talk about giving purpose to pain. And I know that sounds really weird, but I had been asked, especially when I was going through, like when my husband first had passed, that first year was definitely one of the most challenging, I would say. And quite frankly, even the second year, like it definitely got easier over time. But I think back and I'm able to actually remember like what it was in those moments, how I felt to that day to day. And oftentimes people ask me like, how did you get through it? How did you manage it? And, first and foremost, I will say absolutely, unequivocally, that was probably the first thing. My faith was the most important aspect to how I was able to survive, if you will. But the other thing is that because of my faith, what it did do is it actually helped guide my day to day. Surviving, grief-stricken situations, I think requires a moment to moment. A lot of people that might be working through a 12-step program, maybe for some sort of addiction, whether alcohol, drug abuse, things like that, they understand that it's just literally one day at a time. That is sort of the phrase of anybody that's familiar with the 12-step program. And grief, I feel like, is really no different in that sense. Sometimes you're surviving hour to hour. It can be that dramatic. So today I wanted to talk to you about, there's two pieces of scripture that I think talk about what it is, what it means to persevere through pain and trials. So the first one is James chapter 1, verse 12. And it goes, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under the trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." So that's the first one, and it's definitely talking about persevering through trial. This life it will pretty much deliver us with guarantee a life of trials to an extent, some more dramatic than others. And most of us at some point will go through some sort of a loss, whether it's a loss of a loved one, a partner, a child, God forbid, a parent, a grandparent. Sometimes that's a loss of a job that is more than just a job. Like if you had a career and maybe at some point, unfortunately, you get laid off, the job changes, things like that, or in a divorce. I always say that like grief to me it's not qualified by like somebody necessarily passing away. You could be grieving if you were struck by an illness and it has sort of debilitated you or changed your forever. That also would constitute, a period of grief, understandably. So why I wanted to bring up this passage, this James 1, verse 12, was because God is already aware of the trials that are going to come into your life. I do believe, I am of the philosophy that you're never given more than you can handle. And I also love, there's a great saying that I think I've seen on a t-shirt where it's like, God must think I'm a badass because he sure gives me a lot. And I think that's awesome because you know what? Sometimes it feels like that. Sometimes we feel like, oh my God, like literally, oh my God, why does this keep happening? Or why are you putting so much on my plate? I can't handle this. Well, the truth is, and I'm here to tell you that you can. And I understand and I realize that in that moment, trust me, when I was going through my grieving, when my husband first passed, there were days that I literally laid on the floor, like could not move, emotional, devastated, and couldn't figure out, how do I dig myself out of this? How do I get out of this? Now, you don't have to go through the loss of a loved one to understand that kind of depth of feeling as if you are in the bottom of a pit and you have no idea how to get out. Like that can happen to any of us under any circumstance. I mean, you can go through a breakup and be just as devastated. Everybody has their journey and their story that they're telling. And so when I talk about pain into purpose, what I mean by that, so for me, what was sort of my pathway out of this sort of darkness was to really focus on God. I mean, I dedicated myself daily to reading the Bible, focusing on all that was good, all the wonderful things that are promised in the Bible when we are people of faith. The other thing I did is I gave my pain a purpose. What do I mean by that? So I literally every single day, I actually got in a habit. I went onto my Facebook at the time and I started blogging daily about my journey as a widow, and not from a woe is me, complaining sort of way. It was really more of like, I have to make sense of everything that I think I'm supposed to be learning out of this situation. How can I grow from this? And every day I would get on and that was literally how I started my morning, because mornings I found were always the toughest when I was going through this. So I would wake up and I would feel the weight. It's like, when you're dreaming and you're sleeping and it's great and you momentarily kind of forget your circumstance. When I would awake, it was kind of when it would hit me like a rush, and I would sit there kind of feeling like, oh my gosh, this is the new normal. This is the reality. How do I get myself out of bed? How do I even proceed with today with all of this on my shoulders? And so what I would do is I'd open my computer and I'd sit there and I'd write. And whether it was openly and outwardly blogging and talking about just different things that I learned in my marriage, the kind of reflecting on all that was very good. And the other thing I would do is sometimes I would write letters. I'm one of those people that I've always been a proponent of writing, whether it's something that you do publicly or this is something that you do privately. I mean, I think a lot of us grow up, as kids, and maybe we journal and things like that. And then, of course, we become adults and we're like, oh, that's childish. We don't need to do that. Honestly, I think journaling is a really healthy thing to do. And in a lot of cases, especially if I was going through something, maybe I was at ends with someone else or back when I would be going through breakups and things like that, I would actually write letters to people. I would express my feelings. And, I wouldn't necessarily always give them these letters, but it was really cathartic to put my thoughts and my feelings onto paper. And, usually what ended up happening is I would sit there and I'd write it out and I'd save it. And maybe a couple days later, when the emotions kind of pass or maybe settle a little bit, I would reread it. And it was just very cathartic. And like I said, necessarily I wouldn't always give them the letters, but it was really good to get it out, because one of the things that I realized when I was going through, especially I think with grief, what's interesting is that you just kind of move forward. You never get over it necessarily, but you move forward in it. And in my case, what I would say is that the times that I felt most anxious, and like literally like where it could almost exacerbate like an anxiety attack, was usually when I was trying to stifle emotion. And I think a lot of us, we go into this world and we're kind of taught that we're really not supposed to express our feelings. Not really. Maybe to your close friends you might, but even then, if somebody asks you, how are you doing today? Everybody always has this like blanketed, like, oh, I'm great, even if that's not the case. And most of us kind of feel like we don't have the right, no one's interested in hearing how we really are. And the people that really genuinely care about you, they're going to want to hear this. They want to hear your feelings. And I think when we're going through periods of trial, I do feel like having community with friends and with family, people that you can really express yourself with. And if you don't have that, it doesn't mean that there's no one listening, because most importantly and always, God is listening. So even if he is your confidant, I mean, he should always be your first confidant, but even just expressing yourself to him, I think to me, that's what I found is getting the feelings out, getting those emotions out, because once you keep trying to stifle them, it's like pushing down, and eventually it's like a geyser that kind of explodes. And either it manifests itself in, just erratic behavior, it manifests itself in, outbursts and anger, resentments that like you can't process things if you don't actually work through them. So the whole idea of turning pain into purpose is finding a way that you're able to take everything that you're going through, take all the feelings that you're going through and articulate them. And whether it's to other people, whether it's putting it on paper, finding a means to an end of why this is happening and how you can use it to better yourself. So, I say this all the time. I'm so kind of surprised and a little taken aback with how the story of my life has been unfolding, because prior to my husband passing, I had shotguns here and there, but wouldn't say necessarily that I was like a gun girl necessarily, and by no means was I an instructor for firearms. And through the process of discovering or rediscovering who I was now as this new woman in a new circumstance, in a new normal, having lost my husband and kind of realizing that I wanted to figure out what this next chapter was. This next chapter led me to probably embarking on one of the most meaningful parts of my life. It's an aspect that I'm very grateful for. It was very unexpected. And, I look back and I go, wow, I would have never imagined. If you would have asked me the day after, everything had occurred and my husband passed, if you would have asked me then, like, where I saw my life, years from now, I don't think this would have been the narrative I would have given. And I am so grateful for that. And I do credit that the reason that I even got to this place was that I fully put my trust into the Lord. I had an understanding that no matter how bad things got, that there was a purpose to this, and that he would never just leave me and abandon me wherever this was. In this place of uncertainty, this place of emotional devastation and darkness, I knew and I trusted God would never leave me there. But I also knew that he wants us to persevere through trials. He is rooting for us to persevere through trials. And again, like James chapter 1, verse 12, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. So, right there. And then also, to go even further with that, there's another great piece. It's Romans chapter 5, verse 3 through 5. And it goes, not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. And so, I always go back to the idea that when you start to see a recurring theme in the Bible and messages that are constantly affirmations of this is how I want to speak to you, I think God always is reminding us that just because you're a Christian, just because you're a person of faith, it doesn't mean that you're going to have a life without trials. In fact, it's usually kind of the opposite. But what that does mean is that there is a way to persevere. And through that perseverance, what God has awaiting for us on the other side of that is amazing. And while we may not be able to see it in that moment, we have to put our blind faith into him, into those promises, and do our part, do what we can. We can't just sit by and wallow. I could never have just laid on the floor and cried indefinitely. While that may physically feel good in the moment, and it is cathartic, I do feel like allowing yourself to have your emotions, to fully feel them, to express them, whether just in the room with God, to others, to your friends and your family, I think that is a very important aspect of healing. But I also feel like we have to give it a purpose, and giving yourself something to focus on. I mean, think about how often we tell ourselves, oh, we need a distraction. We're going through something really crappy. We need a distraction. Yeah, sure. Distractions are great. But I would say I would encourage anybody going through something, have a healthy distraction. Going out and eating a bunch of junk food isn't going to necessarily help you. Finding a way to take everything that you're feeling and constructively give it a purpose is a way to kind of focus, turning something that could be very negative and detrimental and focusing it in a way that actually can bring you around to a recovery. And it's a slow process. Again, I go back to that whole 12-step way of thinking where it's one day at a time. And sometimes it is literally 1 minute at a time. So be easy on yourself, be gentle. Find outlets that you can talk to people, and whether it's your own sort of private writing, journaling, people do care. You know, the folks that really do matter in your world, they are going to care and they want to know how you're doing, truthfully. And so, you know, I want to put this out there that I'm always available. You know, gosh, I by no means, all I have is the experience that I have. I have the knowledge of what I've went through and what worked for me, and it may work for you, it may not, I'm not sure. But what I will say is that I'm always happy to be there for anybody, to share my experiences with you, to share scripture that might be helpful to you to focus on. And that is my turning my pain into purpose. I'm hoping to take everything that I have experienced in my life and present it in a way that will help you guys out there, whatever you might be going through. And one of the things I will say, and it always troubles my heart, is I never want people to feel like, oh, well, hey, you know, I didn't go through losing my husband, so like my pain isn't that big of a deal, or it doesn't compare, or it's not justified. First of all, I don't think you can compare. There is no comparison. When we are going through something, when we are grieving, whether it's the grief of a physical loss, an emotional loss, maybe it's a kind of a figurative loss, a loss of a job, divorce, things like that. Grief is grief. Pain is pain. There is none that are worse or better. It is what it is. And so I never want anybody to feel like you are not valuable, that your pain is insignificant. It is very significant, very much, and it's very significant to God. So that's why I said I always go back to that. Whatever you're going through, first seek Him more than anything else. But, then start to find a way how you can meet Him. He wants to meet you on that path. He wants to get you back into the light. He wants to get you back on the road. Figure out ways that you can be constructive and proactive in your own journeying back. And like I said, I think expressing feelings, expressing thoughts are really, really valuable. And I definitely encourage that for all of you guys. So that's kind of, what I wanted to go into today, because I do realize that holidays can bring up a lot of stuff, and sometimes they're really great and sometimes it's not so great. So I really sincerely hope you guys out there, if you're going through anything, please, please, please go look at Romans chapter 5, verse 3 through 5, as well as James chapter 1, verse 12. And really just think on that. Find a way to give your pain purpose and to trust in God that He is bringing these trials to you for your good. I know it doesn't feel like it, and I know that somebody telling you, hey, it's going to be okay, never feels great in the moment. It really doesn't. So, I'm not going to be that person that's going to tell you that today, but what I will tell you is you take it 1 minute at a time. You find the ways to pull yourself up. Give your pain a purpose. Don't let the pain control you. You find a way to control it. And how you can do that, at least in my own experience, is that you find a way to constructively use it for good. So that's my 2 cents for today. And like I said, I'm always available for any of you guys. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help. I'm happy to share my experience to you out there. So anyways, enjoy your week. It's Cyber Monday. So I hope you guys get a little shopping going on. And I will talk to you guys very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.